Lots to get into, but first I'll introduce my co-hosts for the afternoon. First, Matt Carolan from the nohuddle.com is back. Matt, how are things?
Good, excited. We're nearly there, at the end of the road.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun weekend ahead, and also joining us to that end is a former guest on the show, Steve O'Rourke, is back as well. Steve, how are things?
Good, Ronan. Nice to be back on.
And most wonderful time of the year, Steve. I think we can both agree here. And I'm just thinking back to my first Super Bowl memories, probably the undefeated Patriots going for that undefeated season to that point, and then being undone by Matt's New York Giants. Do you remember your first Super Bowl experience?
The first one that really stands out to me is the Raiders losing to the Bucs. Unfortunately, as a Raiders fan, that's the one that really stands out, because the Raiders went into that game as such heavy favourites, and it's the only time I think in my lifetime as a LA, Las Vegas, Oakland Raiders fan that I ever felt confident of success, and then to be let down so dramatically on the night. My girlfriend at the time had no interest in football, and I convinced her to stay up and watch it, and because the Raiders were going to allegedly win the Super Bowl, and it ended up being ultimately disappointing both for her and for me. So that's my kind of first memory.
And that Giants game I alluded to, Matt, was that your jumping off point, or had you been on board by that already?
That was probably the point that kind of was the catalyst and really drove me towards being a Giants fan. Yeah. No, my first Super Bowl was the Saints and the Colts, not long after Hurricane Katrina. So I remember having a few friends up to my parents' house at the time to watch that. And at the time it was, I suppose, something of a novelty, because it wasn't too long that Sky Sports were showing the NFL, and I think Red Zone had just been introduced around that time as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it was starting to really gather pace at that time. And to be honest, I remember the first time watching it, I kind of had the gist of it from playing Madden down the years, but that was kind of my first foray into the sport. And as you said there, the Giants were a decent team then. They got better, and then they got on to winning the Super Bowl. So my kind of first iteration of supporting a team in the Super Bowl was a bit more memorable than Steve's, I suppose, in that respect.
And we're around to this year's showpiece, and lots of great coverage across Off the Ball this week. Mike Carlson was on this morning. We had Jim McMahon on last night, and John Gonzalez from Sports Illustrated will be along tomorrow. So we'll be previewing the Super Bowl ourselves shortly, but a few bits of news to get to before the Pick Six, lads, and possibly too much news to get through on today's episode. But Matt, the Kyler Murray situation, which you flagged with me earlier in the week and seems to be developing a little bit of pace, seems the classic young quarterback irked by not getting paid yet, and possibly some uncertainty around Cliff Kingsbury. Is there more to read into it than that, do you reckon?
No, on the surface, probably not. In my opinion, I think it is just a play to get a contract. But if you were to peel back the layers a little bit and explore it, and I have done so, I suppose from a marketing standpoint, it's not unusual for certain NFL players to just do a clean sweep and then start again on their Instagram. As ridiculous as that might sound, Saquon Barkley did it for the Giants a few years ago, so it's not unheard of. The alternatives there, maybe, I suppose, as you said, a falling out with Kingsbury, and he's looking to make a move out of there, or alternatively, maybe he wants to go back to baseball. But if you're putting odds on that kind of thing, I think they're quite long. I think realistically, he's probably just looking for a new contract and wants to be paid like one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
And speaking of quarterbacks, Steve, I don't know if the Kyler Murray situation is grabbing you, but the Tom Brady one is certainly a pervasive narrative, which has, like, Tom Brady being who he is, it's extended into the mainstream, and all this talk about a retirement. The actual retirement was quite underwhelming. I was expecting a LeBron James-esque, I'm leaving the Cavaliers, a premiere on ESPN or something like that. Instead, it was an Instagram post. So to what extent he's 100% retired was probably exacerbated by his chat with Steve Gray during the week, where he said never say never. So where do you stand on the Tom Brady thing? Are you glad to see the back of him, or do you think this is going to drag on for another little while yet?
It's funny, my relationship with Tom Brady has been so highs and lows, because obviously the Tuck rule against the Raiders, their first Super Bowl for the Patriots, and he's one of those players that, strangely enough, the longer he stayed around the game, the more likeable he actually got as a character. And if you'd have told me at the end of the 2021 season that Tom Brady would be a more likeable quarterback than Aaron Rodgers, just wouldn't have believed it. It's amazing how these things kind of go in circle. I think he's done. I think the fact he was talking about retirement even before the final Bucks game of the season, he'd never spoken like that before. He'd always been adamant 45 was the cutoff. I think he's been really honest about like the impact that the way he's gone about his career, which has obviously helped prolong it, has had a massive effect on his family and on his relationship with his wife. And he's spoken quite openly about that. And I think there comes a stage in everybody's life where they go, okay, what are my priorities? And the second Tom Brady's priorities stopped being football, that's when he was never going to be Tom Brady again. So he wasn't going to do a Ben Roethlisberger and stick around 2 seasons too long. And so I think while the actual retirement itself was underwhelming, the reasons behind it and the way he went about it actually are probably better than most quarterbacks end up doing.
Yeah, and like the practicalities in Tampa Bay, as brilliant as it was that they managed to get the same group of players to come back for a second successive season, you know, that's more of a unique chance. There's very little chance of the Tampa Bay being competing at that elite level next year with the current crop that they've got. So he's probably thinking in those practical terms too. So I wouldn't necessarily. There's probably landing spots for him on paper that if it can be navigated, and he, like the Bucks still own his rights, so it wouldn't be as if he could just, you know, retire and go somewhere else. It would need to be negotiated around, but I think there is probably still a 10% chance that we see him play again. But for now, it's goodbye to the greatest player to ever play the game. We should just mention briefly the coaches, lads. And Matt, I might go to you on the Giants, because 2 weeks ago we were potentially talking about Brian Daboll being the front runner, and lo and behold, he's got the job. And it does entwine a little bit with the Brian Flores situation, whereby the Bill Belichick text and all this kind of stuff. So, number one, are you happy with the Daboll appointment?
Yeah, I think so. All things considered, it does seem like there's a remarkable amount of churn each year in terms of the head coaching availabilities. And this year, the trend was really going after offensive coordinators. So in terms of who was actually available, I suppose prior to hiring Brian Daboll, Flores was definitely on that list for me. Brian Daboll was on that list. Mike McDaniel was a really interesting name too. So I always kind of had in my head, if we went for one of those three, I'd be pretty happy. And we wound up getting that, so that's great. But yeah, not to make this about the Giants again, because that's becoming a bit of a trend in itself whenever I come on the show now, Ronan, I think. So, look, I think there's a few nice hires in there. The Josh McDaniel one over to the Raiders is an interesting one. I'm sure Steve can speak to that a little bit more. Doug Peterson's going into Jacksonville, who have a good cap situation, a quarterback who is surely better than what he showed in his first year. I think the fact that he underwhelmed so much sets the bar quite low next year, so he might play with a little bit less pressure. And then in terms of coaching hires that maybe I wasn't as enamoured with, the Lovie Smith one, though it was great to see, I suppose, a minority being hired, doesn't exactly inspire. And then the Nathaniel Hackett one to Denver is an interesting one, because a bit like Adam Gase when he's the head coach for Peyton Manning, you have to think that a lot of the offense is being channeled through what that quarterback does at the line of scrimmage and the intelligence that they bring, rather than what that offensive coordinator is doing. So for someone who is the OC for Aaron Rodgers to go and get a head job is a little bit, I don't want to say dubious, but I think they might be they might have gone for the wrong guy there, unless of course Aaron Rodgers somehow winds up in Denver, so let's not rule that out either.
Yeah, I saw him at some golf exhibition yesterday, and Denver Broncos fans were saying, come to Denver, and he said, we'll see. So that's very much in play. Aaron Rodgers rarely says anything without having, you know, something behind it. So I'd say that's still in play. And from your point of view, Steve, like Matt rattled through some of the interesting ones there. I think McDaniel to Miami is interesting in that they probably shouldn't have sacked Flores. There were mitigating circumstances from their point of view for why they decided to get rid of him. It doesn't seem to make much logical sense for those of us looking in. And then Josh McDaniels, as he said, like once upon a time, the hot young thing, and a whole new generation of coaches have come along since he was that. So I wonder how you feel about him arriving in Las Vegas.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because a bit like Matt, like Mike McDaniel was actually the one I had my eye on. I thought he was the most interesting of all the kind of candidates. And I think this trend towards play calling, offensive minded head coaches, like that's here to stay. Like I think 1/3 of the league now is from either the Shanahan or McVay coaching tree at this stage, and it's all that kind of process. I think on McDaniels, I think his introductory press conference was pretty reassuring in the sense that he's not going to have anything to do with the personnel side of things. I think that was the problem under Gruden, too much say from the head coach. And obviously, McDaniel's own tenure in Denver didn't end too well with drafting Tim Tebow. So hopefully the Raiders avoid players like that. And but I think it could work. I think the hiring of the Giants' former defensive coordinator as DC is a really smart hire. As well, so because the Gus Bradley experience was fine, but you saw against the Chiefs, the team that you absolutely need to beat, they were the one team who had the keys to unlock that defense. So it's just going to be a case of wait and see. But overall, I have to be pretty positive with the hire because I didn't think he was available, and obviously having the ability to get him, then it shows that the Raiders are a club maybe that were attracting coaches they wouldn't have attracted before.
And like people cast their minds back to that Colts situation where he took the job and then turned down the job, and the implication was that he was holding fire to take over the Patriots, and now he's probably looking at the Patriots and thinking, oh, it's not quite the attractive job it was a couple of years ago. So he probably, like, the Raiders, by all intents and purposes, looks like an exciting proposition, bit of a blank canvas in a new city, so I think it makes perfect sense. But these are all very fascinating angles for the next season, but we should focus on the crescendo of this season, and it's time for the Pick Six. Yeah, I think the Rams have been routine subject matter on the snap throughout the season, just given their interesting acquisitions and their model of going after free agents rather than, putting stock in the draft, as is the norm. And then the Bengals, on the flip side, probably haven't captured the imagination for general NFL fans in the same way until this amazing playoff run. And the way they've built their team, Matt, is quite different in that, 2 seasons ago they were nowhere, worst team in the league, and then through drafting Joe Burrow and others and recalibrating the team, recalibrating the coaching staff, they have kind of showcased the parity that makes this league great. So, like, the context of the game in broad terms, it's probably not the matchup we were anticipating, but there's lots to be interested in here.
Yeah, there is. I suppose both from a tactical standpoint as well as a narrative standpoint. I remember when I was first on with you, Ronan, back at Thanksgiving, we actually talked about the kind of teams that could go on a run at the last minute, and we talked about what the boxes they needed to tick in order to do that were. So it meant having a decent run game, having a strong defense, and then just not turning the ball over too much. The Bengals have, to an extent, I think, I suppose in terms of actually tactically how they go about things, are a pass-heavy team. Burrow's been unbelievable this season, frankly, and defensively they're great adjusters, I would say. But in terms of how they've actually built that team versus the Rams, you talk about disparity there, and I suppose putting the draft to one side and just saying we're going to get the biggest names we can. The Bengals are generally quite different to that. So the way that they've gone about their offense, Burrow's first-round pick, Jamar first-round pick, Higgins out of the draft, Boyd out of the draft, that offense is largely predicated on draft-acquired players, whereas defensively, I think they've all but 2 or 3 players are taken through trades, and most of it last offseason, if I'm not mistaken, too. So they've picked really well in free agency, and they've drafted really well in the last few years.
From the Bengals' point of view, like, they just have to limit mistakes and almost put the pressure on McVay to make those bad decisions, I would say, because on paper, the Rams have a more talented team, and the extent to which Taylor can affect that once the ball kicks off, I fail to see it, really.
Yeah, that's probably fair. But then equally, if we'll get to the quarterbacks in a moment, but in terms of who's more likely to make a mistake between Burrow and Stafford, I probably would say Stafford is more likely to make that. So, yeah, look, I mean, they do need to put pressure on McVay where they can, and obviously Zach Taylor knows him quite well. As Steve alluded to there earlier, it's remarkable to think that a third of the league are coming from that McVay or Shanahan tree. So obviously they're doing something right. And we can criticise Zach Taylor, and I do think this team is succeeded in spite of him to an extent. And yes, they have put the ball in Burrow's hand and let him dictate plays quite a bit. But then again, to take his ego out of that situation and actually say, you know what, I know what I've got here, it's a good thing, the smart thing to do is to let Burrow do that, is another, I don't know if it's to credit him as such, but he took the knowledge to know to do that. So that is something. They went from being a bottom 3 scoring offense 2 years in a row to, I think, top 5, top 6 this year. And I think a lot of that is from him knowing when to step back and when to step in.
And on to the quarterbacks, as we said, Steve, and again, it's difficult to frame these things sometimes, but sometimes the narratives are presented before you, and we've got this on one side. We've got a veteran like Matt Stafford who, not quite in must-win territory, given he's on his first sort of playoff sojourn and like having a good crack at it after a few disappointments with Detroit. And then on the flip side, Burrow, who his trajectory, like people are always dying to compare quarterbacks to quarterbacks from the past, and I would say his journey is a very unique one. So it's probably difficult to draw these comparisons, but irrespective of how Sunday goes, like this season has been an unmitigated success for Joe Burrow off the back of an awful injury last season, and to come back and to some extent single-handedly bring this team to a Super Bowl is so impressive. So as we've kind of alluded to, and it's going to run through the rest of our conversation, I would say if the Bengals have any chance on Sunday, Joe Burrow is going to have to overperform as he has in these playoffs.
Yeah, and like I think it's easy to forget because he's been at such a high or of such a high profile since LSU won that national championship. Like Joe Burrow really came from nowhere. Like he had to move from Ohio State to get a starting college position, and his trajectory has just been like unheard of, really. I suppose in modern NFL. And the thing that would worry me, and obviously it won't worry Bengals fans if they win the Super Bowl like on Sunday, but the thing that will worry me is long term, like the punishment he takes, the sacrifices he makes with his own body to get these wins, to make those throws. Like long term, it's not a viable strategy, but it's enough for this year. I think that the Bengals are probably a year ahead of where they thought they would be. I think they honestly took this everything since kind of they started the playoffs has been a bonus for them. I think really where you'll see this team develop is next year, which is unbelievable to get to a Super Bowl in a year that's supposed to be a transition year or whatever. And then on the other side, you've Matthew Stafford, who has performed exceptionally well, has been so good against the blitz, especially this year. And it's a true testament to how bad the coaching he received in Detroit was, and you can't even say it's the people he was surrounded with. He had a Hall of Fame wide receiver at one stage there and couldn't get this far. But it just goes to show how the difference that coaching can make to a quarterback as well. But I still think, yeah, what Matt said, if you're looking at a QB that's more likely to make a mistake in this game, I think it is Matthew Stafford, because 2 or 3 times every game he looks up, sees triple coverage and goes, do you know what? I'm going to chance my arm and put that ball in there. And you just can't afford, like, it's the Super Bowl. It's such a cliche, but 2 or 3 plays will decide this game. I think it's going to be a very close game. 2 or 3 plays could decide it. And the Rams, considering what they have at running back and what we've seen so far, can't afford those turnovers. And yeah, I think it's advantaged Bengals in the QB competition.
Yeah, and like, we talk about the symbiotic relationship between quarterback and coach, and in terms of character, I would say Stafford and McVay are quite similar in their approaches, whereby it echoes my point about McVay, where you kind of have to put him in a position where he's going to make a bad decision. And like, if you take it back to the Chiefs-Bengals game, Matt, where the Bengals in the second half like attuned from the first half and basically said, we're going to let Mahomes have everything underneath. He can have as much time as he wants to dance around in the pocket, but we're not giving him anything deep. And eventually Mahomes threw them the ball. And you get the impression, as Steve's saying there, that if Matthew Stafford gets impatient, he's going to get itchy fingers and unleash one of these passes. So if it's something of a shot to nothing for Joe Burrow, as Steve says, a bit ahead of schedule, Stafford's at a point where he might never get another crack at this. And you wouldn't blame him for being a bit bold with his decision-making on Sunday.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And even if you think about the Rams game against the 49ers there in the NFC Championship, that should have been picked, and we could be looking at San Francisco in the Super Bowl again very, very easily. I suppose you could argue the same with the Bengals and the Chiefs. If Mahomes had just played even a fraction better in that second half, or the last play of the first half, then we could be looking at Chiefs 49ers again. Fine margins the full way through the playoffs, and it really has been tough to call. But to your point around kind of where the Bengals are and being ahead of development, you could almost argue they're 2 years ahead of development, and that can be a dangerous thing. So when other teams look at their kind of meteoric rise to where they are right now, they'll be thinking, what did they do right and how can we emulate that? And as we know, it's kind of a copycat league, and that's what teams tend to do. But if you're trying to model yourself on what the Bengals did, 9 out of 10 teams are probably going to fail, because you're not going to get a Joe Burrow in the top 5 of the draft every year. You're not going to get Jamar Chase in the top 5 of the draft every year, and you yourself are not going to be in the top 5 of the draft every over here. So very, very hard to do to be where they are. I've said all along it's a fairy tale story. I've picked against them twice, 3 times in a row now, I think, at this stage. So I'm a little bit hesitant about picking them again here.
And we move on to number 3 in the pick 6, the receivers and the thrill of the chase, because, you know, it's all intertwined and like we can divide it all up into different positions, and we like to frame the quarterbacks against one another. But we look at the receivers here and Jamar Chase, and specifically his matchup with Jalen Ramsey. This is an actual pure one-on-one, Steve. This is kind of, if they could bring back the old Sky Sports camera and just focus on these two for the whole game, I might flick to that channel every now and then.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear the audio from the conversations they have during this game afterwards. Yeah, it's a funny one because obviously a huge amount of focus is going to be on that. And, you know, Ramsey's reputation is built a little bit like Darrell Revis's was before, from actually teams scheming away from him. And, you know, that's where his strength is, that they don't put their number one receiver on him. But I think we're going to see it. But I think the Bengals have already shown that they're not afraid to throw the ball to Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins or you know, the tight ends, especially if the coverage isn't there down the field. And I think that's going to be just it's such an advantage. Like, there's on the surface, there's so many advantages for the Rams, particularly defensively, and this is another huge one. Like, they are so much better in the secondary, I think, overall than the Bengals. But Chase is not a hugely selfish player. He's willing to, you know, run those sacrifice routes that the ball's never coming to him, but that, you know, it might clear out a route for Tyler Boyd or whatever. And I think that's really interesting. And it's funny because that's probably the only similarity between the way Zach Taylor and the Bengals offense runs and the Rams, because on the other side you've Cooper Kupp, who's, you know, the undoubted best receiver in football at the moment, but he runs so many routes where he's never getting the football. Because they've this like 3-by-1 concept where, you know, they've 3 players on the front side and 1 player on the back side, and Kupp is there to draw attention, and then it's Odell Beckham Jr. on the backside taking a 15-yard dig for a first down, because that's how they know they can win, because all eyes are going to be on Kupp. And I think the Bengals, as the season have gone on, obviously Chase had those 2 massive games down the stretch, but other than that, he's been kind of quiet. But that doesn't mean that the Bengals have been quiet, and that's, I think, the sign of an offense that's working. Is that, like, when your number one receiver is a little bit shut down, you're still scoring points, and I think that could be a big factor on Sunday too.
Yeah, and Chase in the regular season game against the Chiefs was just uncoverable, and he's got this remarkable thing of, you know, yards after the catch and all that. That's all fair, but it seems like he gets so many yards without being touched even. So it's just, he just glides along the field. So just on your point, Steve, though, the secondary receivers, I might go to Matt on Cooper Kupp in a second, but talk about Odell Beckham for a moment here, because you think that back to last year's Super Bowl and talk around certain personnel within the game, and Rob Gronkowski wasn't really being talked about because he didn't have a stellar regular season or anything like that. But, you know, a player from a previous era, it almost felt like, and we kind of put Beckham in that category sometimes and forget, you know, he's still a player in his prime, injuries aside. And with Cooper Kupp to contend with, you do feel that Beckham could have a huge game here in LA on Sunday.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that in the regular season, Beckham was getting open on about 35% of his routes, and in the postseason, it's been over 65% of his routes. So he's stepping up to the occasion as well. And part of that is obviously the attention that Kupp is getting. But I think the main difference, just from a pure X's and O's point of view, is that the Rams are using him in much more like the Giants used to use him than the Browns did. So he's running the same routes, like especially those backside slants and backside digs, but he's running them shallower than the Browns asked him. And it might seem like the stupidest thing in the world, but like when the Browns were asking him to run at like a depth of like 22 yards, he just wasn't getting open. But because of his hips and his ability to take cuts, the Rams are asking him to run that at like 15, 16 yards and cut in then. And it's as simple as that that's making the difference in terms of how open he is. Now, obviously, he was pretty much the focal point of the attack. Well, he should have been the focal point of the attack in Cleveland, whereas he's not in LA. But I still think it makes a difference. It shows that, you as a coach, you should adapt your playbook to the players you have, not ask your players to adapt to the strategy that you want to implement. And it's just smart all around. And I think he's getting his rewards now, because obviously, this is what Odell Beckham has wanted from the time he came into the league, is to have that championship, to go with the attitude he's had, I suppose. And I think you have to say he's put his head down and he's worked really hard. And if he was to be a Super Bowl champion, come the early hours of Monday morning, no one would deny him that he deserves it.
Yeah, it's almost incredible to think, when he first came in, it was apples into an orchard, because Robert Woods was healthy at that time and he was like a luxury, whereas now he's become a hugely fundamental part of the team. Matt, on all that, like the receivers on show on Sunday, like there's a host of interesting dynamics there. Cooper Kupp, we should give more love to, obviously the Triple Crown winner, first since Steve Smith, I believe, to lead in all those categories. So a really special talent on show. But what's the most grabbing you about the receivers we're going to see on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Chase and how he was against the Chiefs, and that he was pretty much unguardable. And I was only thinking about this the other day, and the fact that he caught that slant route and he was just gone was actually reminiscent of a young Odell Beckham in the season that he was kind of carrying the Giants on their shoulders. So I read a stat the other day which said that Burrow's gone from he's gone from 260 yards up to 285 in terms of yards per game. And then on those kind of slant routes, he's gone from 7 yards per attempt up to 17 yards per attempt. So whether it's Chase every time or it's not, the difference that he's making to that offense is obviously huge, and it's really tangible there in terms of the data that goes with it. But he's living in the shadow of Cooper Kupp this year, because it's always going to go to a quarterback, and it probably will be Rodgers or maybe Brady now that he's retired. But Cooper Kupp's been phenomenal throughout the main season. He's carried it into the postseason, which not everyone does. I think it's just one of those historic wide receiver seasons. And I suppose he probably has a bigger chance of being successful now on Sunday as well, not because he's necessarily the better player. But I suppose if you look at Chase, he has to go up against Jalen Ramsey. And I suppose the defence in general that LA have means that Burrow's going to have less time to throw it, whereas Kupp could potentially get over the top. He can beat you on a slant, he can beat you on a curl, whatever it is. He's just got everything in his arsenal, and I think if you're looking at him on this weekend, I think him and Odell, for that matter, are both good bets to get on the score sheet.
Yeah, and you touched on the defences there. We should get them in number 4 in the pick six here. Donald, Thump and Matt. We stick on this trend here, and I'm willing this to be a really competitive game because it's probably the best playoffs I've ever seen, and it deserves a crowning moment. But you kind of peel it back a little bit, and Joe Burrow's the most sacked quarterback in the league, 51 times, and that famously sacked 9 games and somehow managed to win. And amidst that Bengals O-line is up against Aaron Donald and co. And you just look at that recipe as a starting point, and it does not look good for the Bengals.
Yeah. Sometimes you're preparing for a game and you're kind of writing up what you think is going to happen versus, the different permutations and that kind of thing. And then the game happens and you look back and you think, oh, God, yeah, obviously that happened. It makes so much sense. And there is a scenario whereby Donald Miller and Leonard Floyd get after Burrow and the poor guy can't walk out of the stadium. So there is that element to it. At the top of the show, Steve mentioned that the Bengals are quite predictable on first down and that they'll run it time and time again. And that is so true. I do think part of the reason they did that against the Chiefs, though, was because of how badly he was scarred from the game against the Titans. Now, in terms of what he's coming up against this weekend, it is going to be much more like the Titans than it was the Chiefs with that pass rush. So certainly one for him to be worried about. I think we could probably expect Burrow to get the ball out of his hands quite quickly. So back to that point around Chase and kind of running slant routes, wouldn't be surprised if we see a good bit of that. But then looking specifically at that Rams defensive line, Aaron Donald was pacing up and down the sideline against San Francisco, really to galvanise that team and to ensure that they got over the line. And that's not something he typically does. He's not like a Ray Lewis or a Michael Strahan, who's really, really loud and vocal, who's known for all these little snippets or tidbits that you see on social for being loud and abrasive. But when it really matters, he steps up. And obviously the Bengals are going to be very aware of that, probably to a point where maybe they have a 1-2 personnel, get 2 tight ends in just to help protect Burrow where they can. Probably try and double team Donald. But if you double team him, you've got Von Miller there and you've got Leonard Floyd there. So I very much see a scenario where the Rams really get after Burrow and make him struggle. Yeah,
and if Aaron Donald, who most would say, or many would say at least, is the best player in football, if he has a determining impact on Sunday, I don't think anybody will be surprised. But Steve, something you mentioned which isn't getting that much coverage is how impressive the Bengals defense has been, and if the Bengals are to win, the defense is going to have to step up this week too.
Yeah, it is. We're going to have to see what the Bengals showed in the second half against the Chiefs. And it's really interesting that the exact strategy that works against Patrick Mahomes, which is dropping 8 players into coverage and only rushing with 3, is exactly what will force Matthew Stafford to make mistakes, because that deep pass won't be open, so he'll have to just dink and dunk, and he doesn't like doing that. He'll eventually get frustrated and he'll throw something to coverage. I think for me, the most interesting player on the Bengals defense, obviously you've got Hendrickson, gets a lot of the love, and DJ Reader, I think, is a phenomenal run stopper. But for me, the key is going to be Von Bell and how they use him, the strong safety especially, because the defense, I was looking back on both the Chiefs game and the Raiders game, and kind of the way they disguise, it's quite a plain and basic defense, but it's a bit like Steve Spagnuolo's, the way he runs his defense, in the sense that it always looks like there's something else happening, and then they go into something else just at the end. And sometimes you have Von Bell, and just before the ball is snapped, he's 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, and then by the time the ball is in the QB's hands, he's 20 yards deep, and the QB is like, hang on, where's he after coming from? So I think that's really, really interesting. There's nothing... But Aaron Donald is the best player in football because he has spin moves, he has truck moves, he has every move you want from a defensive lineman. And then on the other side, Hendrickson pretty much just has a bull rush. He just lines up with the offensive lineman's chest and tries to run through him. There's nothing spectacular about it, but it's effective because you're constantly pushing that line back into the quarterback. One thing to watch, I think there's only ever been 5 players who've won 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and they've all been quarterbacks. Von Miller has a Super Bowl MVP, and if Aaron Donald gets double teamed in this game, Von Miller has a chance to really make an impact. Now, it comes down to luck. It comes down to who gets the most sacks, who forces a fumble. That will determine if a defensive player gets the MVP. But I have a sneaky suspicion Von Miller has a better chance than Aaron Donald does of getting the Super Bowl MVP this week.
Yeah, and like we mentioned the word narrative a few times, and you can just imagine that coming up in commentary, where if he's having a massive game and they're like, what defensive players have won 2 MVPs and all that talk, and it could be willed into existence. So there's a very good chance. I think Matt will give us some odds on that later on. But just from your point of view, Steve, it's interesting, we've brought it up a couple of times, but the Stafford maybe being a little bit rash and being goaded into taking a chance. Like, I know in your position as a coach, like, how do you have a conversation with a player to act against his, not his better judgment, but his natural instinct? Like, it must be a very difficult thing. If he sees something and there's like a 75% chance against it, and he's a gunslinger, he's still going to take that chance. So you kind of have to live and die with Matthew Stafford a little bit on that, don't you?
That's exactly it. With a player like Stafford, and I'm not comparing the two, but it is similar, that Jay Cutler, like the Jay Cutler that got you like dramatic touchdowns, is the same one who got you a pick 6 on the next play, because he saw the same window and tried to throw the ball. And Stafford's arm talent, and for anyone who kind of is like just maybe like getting into football, you hear coaches and analysts talk about arm talent, like what he does in the angles he moves his arms for his throws, like, it's phenomenal, the power he generates. It goes against all sorts of quarterback coaching techniques. Like, the first thing you do if you get a quarterback who throws sidearm is try to coach it out of him, because it's not as accurate, it's not as strong. But for Matthew Stafford, it's what gets the ball around the defensive lineman who's coming into him. So he's developed it in such a way that, like, it's just a trademark for him. But his arm talent is so good that you have to take the good over the bad with him. And I think that's why the Bengals will look to say to him, look, there's a tiny window that you can fit the football into. Go for it, like, because they know he will. Like, 3 out of 4 times he probably will attempt that pass. So, but you're right. Like, it's really hard to tell a player who trusts himself so much, who backs himself, because you want him to be confident, but sometimes the sideline is the best receiver on the field, because that's the only way it's not going to be intercepted. And I'm always telling quarterbacks to, if it's not on, just throw it to the sideline. We live to fight again, unless it's on 3rd down, then you can understand. But it's when Stafford makes those throws on 1st down and he doesn't give himself the rest of the series to kind of make up the the ground, that's where I think he gets himself into trouble.
And again, we've talked about the running games, but we should move on to them in number 5 here in the pick 6. And it's an interesting one because you look at the stats, and Cincinnati were 14th in pass play frequency in 2021, and LA were 16th. So like kind of two middle of the road teams in that regard. You know, they're not overly pass heavy on the numbers, but then the playoffs seem to contradict that a little bit, where the Bengals have needed to throw a lot to bail themselves out, and similarly the Rams have all but abandoned the run game and had some mishaps, most notably against the Bucs, where they'd put the ball on the ground a few times. So Matt, I don't think it'll take much for either team to be abandoning the run game here, but that's not to say the likes of Mixon or Akers can't have an impact this weekend.
Yeah. And if you compare it to something like a Champions League final, for example, a lot of the time they're tetchy affairs, cagey, it's 0-0 for a long time, and everyone's afraid to make a mistake. I think the same can be said here, where more so the Bengals, I wouldn't be surprised, because they did against the Chiefs, that they do hand it off a little bit for maybe fear of being sacked, or maybe just to keep the game close as much as they can. Because if this is a close game, I think you would rather the ball in Burrow's hands than Stafford's. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to manage the clock and run it as much as they can anyway. And they have the better back in Mixon. Problem is they don't have the better offensive line. It's like a leaky bucket in that respect. So that probably will suffer them a little bit. You articulated it perfectly in terms of where they kind of rank in the league, in terms of running the ball. They're both middle of the road, and when you look at teams that typically do well getting through the playoffs, they generally do run the ball quite well. So it's interesting. Now, I don't see it being a particularly run-heavy game, or at least I'm hoping it's not a particularly run-heavy game, because if both these quarterbacks decide to throw it a lot, however egregious the decisions are, it makes for a much more entertaining game than just seeing them run it down the throat time and time again.
And Steve, again, putting your coach's hat on, you hear it on commentary all the time, don't abandon the run, even if you're behind, stick with the run because it opens up other stuff. Like, do you think that's going to be the case? These are two teams who like to throw the ball, and McVay in particular has these exotic designs that he wants to put on show, especially when there's a billion people watching. But there is something to that old idiom of, you know, just running for running's sake almost.
Yeah, and look, I've criticised it a couple of times about the Bengals, say, running it on first down, but, you know, Matt alluded to it there. It's much better than taking an 8-yard sack on first down, because you're trying to force a throw that your offensive line can't block for. So I think you do have to kind of keep them honest and try and keep 7 men in the box. But we've already talked about how, for the Bengals to win, they're probably going to have to go to that like really light box of only 3 players and everyone else in coverage. And the thing is, because the Rams run that outside zone kind of, so their runs tend to be more towards the sideline than the middle of the field. Even having, you know, an empty middle of the field isn't going to help them. And we saw what happened against the Bucs, especially when the Rams tried to control the time of possession with the run game. It nearly cost them the game. So I think we'll see both teams move away from the run pretty quickly with 1 or 2 run plays dabbled in every now and again. But like Cam Akers, as much as a medical marvel it is that he's returned, you know, after what should have been a season-ending ACL injury, like he's only averaging 2.6 yards a carry since he came back. It's been really, really poor. And I agree, Mixon is the better of the 2 backs, but he has a much worse line in front of him. So it's really hard to kind of establish anything. And plus, play action only works if you genuinely think they're going to run the ball. And if neither team see the other team as being a threat, you might as well use that extra half second to run a route and get them from the back, or leave them in for pass protection, something like that, rather than wasting time on something that both teams know isn't going to happen.
Yeah, and like Akers and Sony Michel, neither of them have cracked 60 yards in the playoffs, so it's not a good look. But what we will see, and it's been precipitated by Deebo Samuel for the 49ers, but obviously existed before him and will exist long after him, is getting the receivers involved, you know, in almost a quasi-run game. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of, you know, close to handoffs to the likes of Cup and Chase, you know, short throws and just trying to work the ball up the field that way. So that's probably something people can keep an eye out for on Sunday. And just lastly in the pick 6, any other business, lads? Because we've covered most of the elements of the game here, but a name we haven't mentioned is Evan McPherson, who's one of the most clutch players of these playoffs. And I think if it comes down to him having to nail a kick to win it, it shouldn't be an issue. Matt Gay similarly has had walk-off field goals in this campaign, not from the same distance or possibly under the same pressure, but you know, these are the kind of elements which could come to the fore. And then you've got Andrew Whitworth, who's coming into Super Bowl age 40, You know, you've got Weddle, who was playing pickup basketball a few weeks ago and is now, you know, taking serious snaps. I think he led the Rams for tackles a couple of weeks ago. So these are all very interesting stories. I'll go to you, Matt. Is there anything else we should mention here?
Well, McPherson's the interesting one there. So I think I said at the top that there's a few ways this game plays out. The first is that the Rams kind of hit fifth gear and they don't look back. Burrow gets destroyed, Donald run amok, Von Miller wins the MVP, as Steve said, and we look back and we think, oh, well, we should have seen that coming. The second one is that it's game of two halves, and that's not unlikely because both of these teams tend to play well for parts of a game, but not necessarily the full thing. So I can certainly see a scenario similar to the Bengals in the Chiefs game, whereby the Rams go up, let's say 10, 14 points, and then the Bengals rally back in the second half, or vice versa. And then the final one, I suppose, is that the Rams are the better team, but Stafford gets itchy and he starts throwing a lot of picks, and it's a close game. And if it's a close game, you want Joe Burrow because he's a safer pair of hands, and he just, you know, when the room gets hot, he's the coolest head there. And then the other person's McPherson because he's worth 3 points time after time.
Steve, what do you reckon? Anything grabbing you in terms of the miscellaneous section?
For me, I think we're going to see a little bit of trickery. You've already alluded to the fact that both coaches like to, if the receivers aren't getting catches, they like to get the ball into their hand in the run game. I think we're going to see a very long throw by a receiver to either his quarterback or another receiver. I think that's something to keep an eye out from. Like Beckham ran that quite successfully with the Giants. He did it a couple of times with the Browns as well. So if I was looking at anything, if you see Odell Beckham on any kind of a sweep, look out for the open player down the field, because I think that ball could be going, and it might even be the longest pass of the game, because if the defense are going to run the way we think they might run for the rest of it, this could be like nip and tuck stuff, and Matt said, like a really cagey affair. So the explosive plays could come from trickery, and like, you know, the thing is, it's the Super Bowl. You don't have a second chance at this. You might as well just empty the playbook, because, you know, you see coaches sometimes, and in a meaningless week 17 or 18 game, they show you something brilliant that they're after designing. You go, why not save that for a game where it actually means something? So that's what I'm looking forward to, because, you know, anything that kind of puts a defense on edge will always excite me in a game.
Yeah, and I think was it 10 years since Sean Payton's onside kick from the kickoff. So, you know, there's always something in the Super Bowl. The lights went out one year, and, you know, these things happen. So there's lots to look forward to, and we always talk ourselves into a fascinating Super Bowl, but this genuinely should be one. So prediction time, lads. I'll go first just to set you at ease. I think I'm falling down on something I alluded to earlier, that if the Rams get ahead and it's put on Burrow to throw them out of trouble, that O-line is just not good enough. And if there's an invitation for Donald and co to get after him, I think it could be trouble. So I'm going to settle on maybe a 9-point victory for the Rams. Matt, I'll go to you for a prediction.
Yeah, going back to those scenarios, it's a bit of a head versus heart thing for me. So my head says that the Rams by something similar to that, maybe 9 or 10 points, and they absolutely destroy them. But this hasn't really been a season where the favourites have won out, and it's been a season of the underdogs. And no one epitomises that quite like the Bengals. So I'd almost throw all data, all analytics, all that stuff out the window, and I'm just going to pick the Bengals, because that seems to be the kind of season that it's been.
I love it. I hope you're right as well. And in terms of prop bets, there's thousands of them, so we won't go through all those. There's plenty of podcasts where you can get those. But I normally give a tip on the first song in the Super Bowl halftime show. So for me, it's Still Dre, Still DRE will be the first song. I think it's like 5th down the odds, and the favourite is California Love. So I'm backing Still Dre into California Love. So if people are interested in taking my tips, I think I've been right 3 years in a row. So that's where I'm going. Matt, you have a couple of props as well?
Nothing quite like that, I don't think. I mean, Steve touched on it, but look, if we go back to that scenario whereby the Rams do dominate, I really like Von Miller 33-1 and to be MVP. Game of two halves, I like Odell for first touchdown. I think he's 12-1 on special at the minute. I think that's nice. But if I am backing my own bet, I think if they win it, it's because of Burrow. So I'd go maybe a double up on Bengals and Burrow MVP. And
the only bet I might actually place, because I don't think we can do the Super Bowl halftime show ones over here, will be on, I think Van Jefferson could be a good shout for first touchdown, just because the coaches will be thinking outside the box so much, trying to out-scheme each other. It could be one of those maybe lesser names that could get open. Steve, on your side, in terms of a a game prediction at large, and anything else you foresee this Sunday?
Yeah, just following on from your prop bets thing, I haven't seen the odds for it yet, but I fancy like Matt Stafford to actually have a touchdown reception in this game. Oof. So if you can find those odds somewhere, it might be worth looking at. Not quite the Phillies special. I think it'll be something different, but yeah, I think that's potential on Sunday. But in terms of the game, yeah, look, sometimes the Super Bowl doesn't make sense in the build-up, and the winner of the Super Bowl doesn't make sense in the build-up. And it's only when you're removed from it afterwards you go, actually, that narrative made sense throughout the season. And that might be post-rationalization. It might be just the romantic in me who's like looks for the storyline or whatever. But nothing about the Bengals getting this far. They potentially should have lost to the Raiders, phantom whistles or not. Like they absolutely should have lost to the Chiefs. They could have lost to the Titans, and yet they're here. So again, like logic would say this is David and Goliath. Like it's a superstar Rams team against, a Renford rejects Cincinnati Bengals. And yeah, my heart is telling me it's the Bengals 27-20. I think they're going to keep the Rams, keep it low scoring. I think Sean McVay is going to probably get inside his own head again, and then that is going to be the narrative after the game, that Joe Burrow only wins championships and that Sean McVay bottles it in the big game.
Yeah, and I think we'd all love to see, as long as it's in keeping with the rest of these playoffs, if it comes down to the crunch in those last 2 minutes, I think we'd all be delighted with that especially. So thanks a million, lads. Absolutely brilliant analysis on the game, and hopefully it lives up to the billing. Thanks a million again for tuning in, and we will review the Super Bowl next week.